Great. Hello. Thank you, everybody, for allowing me to come and present. This is part of our overall series on identifying areas for price improvement across various price modes. And today we're going to focus on, I think, one of the more challenging price modes that's out there, which is customer-specific pricing. As part of this, we have dedicated a presentation to be just a little bit different from others that we'll see along the way. But right, I think we can do a great introduction. I am a VP in a professional services organization and part of our executive management team. If you've ever worked with Zilliant or been around other of our pricing scientists, you'll know that they're pretty exacting. So although I might be with Zilliant for about 13 years, they would say I've been with Zilliant for about this long. And they're a wonderful group to work with. In terms of today's purpose, I wanted to talk through three main areas. So first is to provide an overall idea and context for what we are talking about in terms of what is that customer-specific pricing and how does it fit with the other price modes that's out there. Also, since I'm a consultant, you can't have a presentation without mentioning framework somewhere in there. So that the check's in the mail there. The second is differentiating the different types of customer-specific pricing. There are a couple of varieties that we're going to dig into today. Each of these have their own problems, but also very different solutions with different opportunities associated with them. And then we'll look at some more specific solutions at a business level about how to go about improving pricing among those two types. So first off, I'd like to talk just about a term that we have here, which is a price mode. So in order to put this into a good understanding, we kind of start with the four types of pricing, and these are the four modes of list, matrix, agreement, which we also refer to as customer specific, and override. So if we start with our list, that's oftentimes going to be a reference. And I'm not sure if we can kind of reverse the screen so that we have the presentation as the main and I'm kind of the minor, the small window. That might help in some of our presentation, Megan. So we may start with the list the list portion. That often is a reference in the market. Sometimes customers pay it if we have more of a retail bent or direct to consumers or direct to smaller businesses. But oftentimes this is just a reference that we use to go about building some of our other modes that are out there. So we may go about building another set of lists via our matrix that are oftentimes based upon customer attributes and geography. So here I've taken kind of a simplified approach and said, well, we are going to differentiate pricing that's not negotiated, that shows up in a list for our customer sizes, and maybe we have a really small customer, a cash customer, or a walk-in, that might equal that list price. Then we can oftentimes end up, and some percentage of revenue and sales is going to be tied to overrides that come in. These are essentially when a competitor may offer a deep discount to what's offered on list, and you begin a negotiation for that order. So this is really a case when there might be a good, say we're offering filters for whatever reason, and our customer's offering this filter for $80 for this order, this day. That price will be $80, but there's not really an expectation that anytime you come back, you may pay $80. However, we also know that there are agreement or customer-specific prices, and this is the topic of today. Our agreement prices are when we have negotiated on either one or multiple categories or products, what that price is going to be that's set at a discount. And the two differences here are, one, there's an expectation of some volume in exchange for that discounted price. And the second is that each time the customer comes back to purchase with us, that they will receive that price. So that's kind of instantiated as a pricing record within our ERP or CPQ application. And then finally, we know that these two pieces might be connected. So we may have negotiated a filter price for a large customer of $72, really a huge discount off of my list or even my matrix price. And then that customer may come in and say, well, I recognize that I have it for $72, yet your competitor is offering it for $70. So for this order, that price of $70 may be good. But these are kind of the various objects that we have, or price modes that we have. Now, another way of looking at this is essentially by a price waterfall. A favorite go-to of any pricing consultant out there, where we may start with a list. We will then further modify that or differentiate the price, sometimes down, but also sometimes up. Say if we're setting a country price that's outside of where that good is produced, that we're first modifying it. So that kind of sets our segment price. Then we may negotiate an agreement price that is going to be good for that customer. Then finally, there might be an override that further brings that price down until we get to an invoice, recognizing that there may be some other activities or items that hit before we get to an actual invoice price. One other note to mention here is who owns the decisions behind these price modes differs. So our list is oftentimes set by a product or category manager. Our matrix price is set by a strategic pricing organization or marketing or sales leadership. And then our agreements are negotiated either between account managers and our customers or sales groups. But they may, depending upon the size and complexity of it, for very large formal ones, there might be a national account team with a dedicated set of analysts where it needs to go to executive or board approval, all the way down to an individual at, say, a branch or a call center creating a customer-specific price for one part for a relatively modest sized customer. And then finally, our overrides, which are just kind of point decisions along the way, may be owned by an inside sales group or counter rep or sales rep. So really, depending upon the level of discretion there and the object, who is making these decisions really changes. When we are going into organizations, we very much like to understand what the modes are that are used, what percentage of sales are associated with each one, and who is making the decision along the way. For us, that really unlocks an understanding of how that organization prices, both in terms of their decision-making, the product and pricing strategy, how they price, which artifacts are used, how they go about selling, through which channels. And then it also gives us a good idea about how an application or a set of applications is configured to represent that pricing culture that's been established. So when we take into account pricing strategy, the modes and how they are used and priced, the technical configuration, the decision-making, the ownership of those decisions, that combined gives us an idea about what a company's pricing architecture is. And once we have a better feel for that pricing architecture, we can go about diagnosing each one of the modes, understand the challenges that are associated with it, and then get to the opportunities and fixes for those respective modes and problems. Now, as we know, each organization may come about its pricing architecture differently. It may be something that's well planned and a wonderful construction that a lot of thought has been put into, or it may have been a really great idea at the beginning, but some problems have begun to develop over time. So just a little bit about, and I'd love to get you all's thoughts on this. And if you can think some about what your organization looks like, since PPS focuses many times upon business to business, I think that the next ones are going to be very relevant. But if you have an organization that's either very e-commerce focused, there's not necessarily a lot of negotiation, or it's retail oriented, then you might be an organization that's selling a lot on list. So it's if we kind of think of that diagram on the left-hand side, the pie chart, as the percentage of sales through which your organization, which mode it uses to sell. This is an organization example where list is the predominant one, and there's a bit of customer specific and then a little bit of negotiation otherwise. However, what we find is many business-to-business organizations look more like this, where there is some relatively large percentage of sales that is on matrix. It is not negotiated, but it is differentiated pricing. And then, say, 20% of sales might be negotiated via agreements or customer-specific pricing. And then there's another part that is negotiated ad hoc at the order level in order to address some point competitive issues along the way. Still, other organizations might look like this. We see this a little bit more in terms of some process industry organizations where a large percentage of sales is wrapped up via that customer-specific agreements. And there is some portion sold on matrix as well, but it's really a smaller percentage than we have on agreement. And then again, there is some 15% on negotiated. Then I think where Zilliant really started, nearly 20 years ago, was focusing on organizations that looked like this, where really all of these pricing decisions were highly decentralized at the inside sales level, and there was quite a bit of negotiation going on. However, that negotiation is happening on an order-by-order basis. So we see these in organizations where there might be a significant branch population or inside sales, where the inside sales groups are really empowered to make negotiation decisions on the spot. So today we're going to focus on organizations that really look like this and like this. However, this is going to be relevant for any organization that has agreements or customer-specific pricing. So as I said, we'll focus on agreements today in terms of the mode, and that's where we're setting it in context. Let's talk about these two types. So when we look at just the big block of customer-specific pricing, there are actually what we find is two types. There, on the left-hand side, there are the customer exceptions, where these are single pricing records, where really the context is, let's take a branch business, for example. Customer comes in, is a regular customer. They have a lot of focus on, we'll go with, again, filters. They would like to come back and purchase filters from us every week, and they're guaranteeing some amount of volume. They're a modest size organization since they're walking in, but we want to make sure that they're a loyal customer. We want to make sure and get all of that volume and reward them for their business. So here's a case where it's an owner. The owner is the branch sales rep. The way that's represented is a pricing record, an ERP or CPQ application. Also, these decisions are not necessarily going to go for CEO approval. These are ones that might be made very quickly, where the sales group says, yes, we'll go and put these couple of items or this product category, we'll discount it, we'll set what the price is going to be, and then we'll review it on occasion. And the reality is that price might not be reviewed for a very long time. Then we have a second set, which is a very different dynamic. And these are the far more formalized customer contracts or agreements that we have in business-to-business organizations, where these are oftentimes the context is an RFP or an RFQ. This is going to be managed by the national accounts team. There might be a rep handling this. There might even be a team of analysts there in order to support the negotiation and the analysis behind it, where these are represented not just by a pricing record in a database somewhere, but there might also be a signed contract, or there might be a set of documents that where we've created a customer-specific price list that we manage with them on a regular basis. Also, we may be setting more than just price here. We might be setting pricing, terms, volume expectations, when they can take that volume, and when pricing and how pricing can be updated. So those terms, or rather the number of items that are discussed during this might be hundreds. We've seen even tens of thousands of items which are simultaneously negotiated and prices set. For the purpose of today's discussion, actually, there's one other important piece to this, which is the renewal is annually. And once those prices are set, it may be extremely difficult to change them. So hence the title of our presentation, where sales says, you cannot touch this. All right. So a little bit about the different approaches for these. Obviously, the way in which we can go about achieving some price improvement in these two types, although they may look the same in a database, although we might both call them customer-specific pricing, these things are not the same. And the way in which we can attack them is quite different. So this is not one where we want to try kind of a full frontal assault, but instead we want to kind of work around the edges and to understand what we can go about improving. So obviously the pieces that are in common are, yes, it's customer specific. We're going to give customers a certain price in the future, but who owns these things in the organization may differ. The amount of analysis that's put into them may differ. And then just the way in which we can go about modifying price for them can be very different as well. So let's explore those differences and find out where we can actually get some price improvement via this a bit of exploration of moving around the edges. So the first one we will look at is customer exceptions. When we think about the problem set for these customers, or rather this price mode of customer exceptions, so these are the ones where we are, they're negotiated kind of ad hoc. They might be for a small number of customers and at times informal, but we recognize some of them may be formal. There are a host of issues. So first off, there's the price setting portion of it. The prices that were set may have been misaligned with the market. They may have also been misaligned with how we're going to go to it and go to market. And when they are misset, because say the sales rep might not have a good understanding of what the prices should be, that might create quite a bit of dispersion, and then also some prices that are lower than they need to be. The other kind of interesting part about customer exceptions is that they are represented in a database via a pricing record. And that is both good because we can find out what it is. We have clear visibility into it. But the challenge here is oftentimes how they are created. So we see that they'll lack dates or they're set in certain terms that might not be the best. And then finally, this has to do kind of with any decentralization of pricing decisions, where there are some strategic fundamental issues of it erodes some of the control that pricing has, and the go-to-market strategy. So let's dig into these a bit. First off, what we know is customer exceptions, they're a little bit of one-hit wonders right there. So much like our favorite song of Hathaway, What is Love? We know that when a customer walks in, they may ask for a certain price, and we'll say, well, kind of think about what those are, and we'll go ahead and honor that price that was requested. However, the decision process may have been that same duration. So we don't necessarily have a lot of background about why we came up with that price, yet it now lives in our system, and it's one which we're going to need to honor. Second item is, once we set those prices, and because not everybody has the same level of familiarity with every product and every market, we can end up with very broad prices for single items. When we've gone in to look at certain of our customers and prospects, we will typically see a very wide distribution of these prices. For those of you who are all pricing professionals, I am sure this does not come as a surprise to you all. But we also know that some of these might either at the time be set where they were at or below cost, or over time they may have gone to be under cost as the cost environment has changed over time. And we recognize the cost environment is definitely changing more now due to changes in tariffs and just other fluctuating cost environment. So when we also look at our customer and prospect organizations, once we create a pricing exception, they need to be entered into our system. This is something that actually does matter, not just in the price that we discussed and negotiated with our customer, but also how we're representing that price in our discussions with our pricing organization and how it gets entered into that ERP or CPQ application. This is an example where when we looked at the prices there, the specificity of the price was customer product specific. So might be Bob's Garage and a filter, and that net price might have been $12.34. What we saw when we looked at this organization was for their customer exceptions, 99% of them were set in net price terms. Now, that might be entirely relevant and the right thing to do for that organization or that industry in terms of practice. However, we also know that it may be best to describe the price at the time as $12.34. However, the price might be able to be recorded as a discount from list. So as that list changes, then we will have a bit of flow of that organization or of that price. Also, other ways of doing it are entering it as a markup or as a margin, not when we discuss it with a customer. Perhaps not even when the sales rep enters it. They might enter $12.34, but the way it might be represented on the back end is via another price type of markup, margin, or discount from list. Another neat thing that we found is many pricing records have not been updated in a long time. So that was a great price when it was first entered 3 years ago. However, the price record is now older than Noah. And this is something that's very common within organizations. If you all have an opportunity, I'd really recommend digging into your ERP or CPQ application and taking a look at the date of the expiration date for your pricing records. You might find something that looks like this, where the date that it was created was years ago, and then here is one where the end date is, where there is some percentage, say 50%, that have an end date, but then another large percentage that either have no end date or where the end date is set for December 31st, 2099, which might as well be when the sun burns out. Now, if we get back a little bit to how we're going through the price setting process, we may have worked out via our management and discussion with the sales organization a pricing strategy. This may not be relevant for everybody, but this might be one where we are going to give preferential pricing for our large customers in order to lock in the volume and retain that relationship. Or it could be that on large orders, we want to provide a better price. However, what we see once we dig into matters is not only is there dispersion of many different prices, however, the price that we see does not align with our go-to-market approach. So we've then kind of lost out in terms of implementing our pricing strategy here. So this is maybe another opportunity for analysis, is to look into the customer-specific records which you all have, take a look at the size of the customer, and then plot that size of the customer versus the price that is actually paid, or order size, or whatever may be kind of most relevant for your organization. That third area of problems which we discussed had to do with the strategy. First was our go-to-market strategy. The second one really is the percentage of revenue that's flowing through each of the modes. So if we go back to our mode discussion and think about our list and our matrix, those are price modes that are explicitly controlled via our product managers and our pricing organization. Oftentimes, the category managers are supported by the pricing organization, but in either case, those are centrally controlled mechanisms where when our management team asks for some margin improvement, or there's a desire to run a pricing initiative, if the pricing decisions are all decentralized, that makes it very difficult to go about gaining margin in those areas. So there's a bit of a strategic decision about how many pieces on the board we necessarily have for our blue spots of the organizational function that sets pricing. And we want to go about increasing the amount that is centralized when it makes sense. So if we think about this, and what we don't want to have happen is in the diagram which we have, if we just take this first one here, for year one, where 75% of sales was priced at the matrix or using the matrix, we would say that's a really high number. That's excellent in terms of having a matrix price that's relevant for the market, and one which the sales team has confidence in that they can go about achieving those prices. Also, there may just be a bit of a cultural issue of the pricing architecture of the organization is to use matrix and keep it updated and try to minimize that use of customer exceptions. However, over time, if that matrix is not up to date, or if there's just a lot more interest in using customer exceptions, then we may see that percentage growing over time of sales that's priced using customer exceptions. Also, even if I think you have a great matrix approach, just having, what we see is customer-specific pricing accumulates. So more and more revenue may be priced using that customer-specific or agreement pricing because these tend to not go away. Rather, just more and more tend to be added. So there's a need to have an approach to evaluate those records and decide what to go do about them. And we're going to get into how to approach that a little bit later in this presentation. So as we talked about, misalignment is there are many customer exception records in organizations that we work in. I think in some that we've worked with over the last few years, we've seen either the hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of customer exception records created, some of which are associated with agreements. We think that's a great use. And then there will be others that were set either by counter individuals or inside sales and may have originally been established years and years back. So the problem with them is kind of like Kirk with the trouble with tribbles. They just keep on multiplying. So there's the inherent question of where do we start? How do we go about tackling this large administrative burden as well as strategic issue? So let's talk about it. There are really 3 stages of the customer exception process where we can go about either initially setting or touching prices for this. So first off, we have the initial price setting. And this is a negotiation that occurs in between sales and our customers, as we'd all kind of expect. The second is there's an opportunity, either explicitly or implicitly, to go about modifying those records. And this is a dynamic in between pricing and sales. We kind of think about this as the off-cycle modifications. And then the third is when we have explicit renegotiation opportunities. So we might think about this for our larger contracts, like an annual basis, or when we have major cost changes coming through, either in January or July, where we can open up this pricing and have some of these discussions. And I want to understand, and I understand with some of your organizations, it is possible to renegotiate or to modify, and for others, either due to the pricing kind of culture within the industry or the company, that might not be an opportunity. But let's kind of explore where there is. So the first stage is that initial price setting, where we can go about, one, providing better guidance to, with our kind of start, target, and floor guidance that will help us take into account the negotiation guidance. We might think about one set of pricing for our overrides where there's not a volume expectation, but then perhaps a different set of pricing for our customer-specific prices. So what we want to put in here is we have a distribution. We might set out a start, target, and floor, and that will hopefully help us shape that distribution to have less occurring below floor and move more of it in between our start to target. I think for those of you who talked to Zilliant before, you may have heard this story before. There's a lot more to, I think, some of these processes. The second, and this really varies upon the approach taken and the size of the request. I'm just going to touch on this a little bit now and come back to it later when we have our customer agreements that are more formal. But there might be an opportunity at the point of decision to go about including some analytics and some guidance to help with the decision making. We can go about having an approval workflow that is reviewed by an individual or management, or perhaps auto-approved, and then those pricing records are set. More on that later. What I'd like to talk about is the ongoing management. So we have a opportunity here with our ongoing management to go about building a repeatable process to evaluate those customer-specific records. But we want to make sure that first off, we can explain the approach that we have a given set of KPIs and a great rationale that we can take to our sales leadership and to our executive leadership to describe why we want to go about changing this. And as part of building capital to make this possible, we want to go about sizing the prize. So if we go back to that scatter diagram to say, well, we have very wide dispersion. Some of these are now below cost, or we have really poor alignment with our go-to-market strategy. We think people are getting prices that they just shouldn't. That's a great way of building up some rationale and reason to go about changing these around the edges. The second is we would not want to approach changes to some of these customer-specific prices for our most sensitive customers or most sensitive products, or even sensitive products for very small customers. So I think there needs to be great organizational alignment behind what is in bounds to go about touching and what's not. And then also, when it is modified, is to think about what options are on the table. We're going to look at an example in a little bit, but some are just to say, well, we'll do nothing. It doesn't hit the criteria necessary in order to modify, or we may want to modify some of the prices or other attributes of the pricing record, or we may just want to say, this is not right for us. And we think that we can go ahead and move this off of our books. And finally is, we don't want this just to be purely a one-way discussion. We need this both at a high level to be a discussion between pricing leadership and sales leadership, as well as giving good visibility into what changes are being made to the sales or account managers where they will experience some changes in price. So let's take a look at an example and walk through what it looks like for an organization to build a good repeatable process. So first, we want to take the pricing records that are from that source application, extract them, and then filter them to make sure that they're well aligned with the criteria which we talked about before of what's in scope. This might be by the type of record. So maybe we only want to look at product customer combinations, so they're very specific. Maybe we only want to look at those that are net price, and for those in the business scope, so perhaps only for our smaller customers is what we may want to set our scope for. Then the second is we want to go about enhancing data. So adding in some of the information which is not going to be available on the record itself. Many times these pricing condition records are just simply product, customer, price. That's it. Well, there's a lot more information that we need in order to make decisions on that. We need to know what the margins are, what the sales activity has been on it, what attributes of our customers, are they a small, medium, or large customer? Are these products really high visibility for them? Are these products customer combinations that are highly price sensitive or not? So this is all information that we need to go about adding before we take steps. Now let's take a look at some of those items that we have to go about changing. First off are, say, price initiatives, where if price was set 2 years ago, let me back up a little bit. These are all just samples of things that we've seen in the past and that may be relevant for your organization. They may not be. So also these might be able to be used in conjunction with one another. We'll explore that in a bit. But an example is where price was originally set on this pricing condition 2 years ago. However, it's now well below cost. So we want to now move this so that we want to expire the record, or we want to set the record to the relevant matrix value. Could also be that it's below cost, so we want to set it to some minimum margin threshold. It could be if we have price guidance and your organization is open to it, There might be a condition where for small customers where the prices are either below floor or say more than 10% below floor, then we want to move it to the floor. And we might also may have the case where there's a net price for our small customers, and we recognize that maybe for these, we do not want the price type to be net price anymore. And for our small customers, what we want to do is we want to set it as a discount from list. So perhaps it doesn't change at all for the next 6 months, but when we do have changes to our list, we do want to see those changes flow through on our customer exception records. And we may believe that for our small customers, these are modifications that we can make and will be accepted by the market. The second is when cost changes roll through. So maybe that if cost decreases, you want to pass through all of the cost increase. Or as cost decreases, you may want to pass through a percentage of that cost decrease. So it might be 100%, might be 5%, or 50% of that decrease in order to better enhance your margin. Also, some of these might be taken together, where if the pricing record was set where it was originally established 2 years ago, and costs have increased, and it is currently below floor or below cost, then you want to go about passing things through. So I think there's a lot of flexibility and thought that can be put into how you want to go about modifying these records. The third is date modification. So for all of those records where it's either null or it's set to when the sun's going to burn out, then perhaps you set that expiration date to be the end of the year or 6 months from now or 12 months from now, but really try to bring it back so that there is some kind of expectation of that there is going to be an end date for the pricing by which it needs to be reviewed. Then the most controversial, but one which I think is relevant out there in some cases, is to expire the record. So we may have a case where there were no sales related to this customer product combination over the past 18 or 24 months. Maybe it's best not to have one more tribble out there and instead go ahead and remove the record, end date it so that for tomorrow or the end of the year. Also, it could be that the price that was set some time back that was customer specific is now well in line with the revised matrix prices that you've put into market, which you feel are really well market aligned. So if that customer specific price is close to that revised matrix price, go ahead and get rid of the record. Let that pricing go ahead and happen at the matrix instead. Finally, it could be that you say, well, listen, we think that for our small, medium, and large customers, it's entirely relevant to have exception prices. However, we feel that for our extra small or our cash customers, they don't get exception records. And so what we're going to do is we're going to simply remove them, or we're going to move their end date to be pretty close to the next 3 months. So these are all kind of different ways in which customer-specific pricing records, which we think are fixed, can be moved around the edges. Just so we're clear, I think failure here would be to try to go and expire records for customers that are large or customers that have certain products that are very important to them, or where there's a lot of revenue flowing through it at the existing price and it's important to them. Those are really not, I think, the fights to go fight using this process, but instead kind of take that to the next level about talking about account review of pricing and having those discussions be really much more mature and data-based. So we may set all of those things, we may run them, take a look at what they look like, and then we want to have a review process with them. So take whatever review interface is relevant for you, whether it's Excel or a report or an application or whatever it might be, and make sure you have that discussion at a summary level and an individual account level with those individuals who are responsible for those customers. And then once you're done with that process, go about publishing them back and future dating those exception prices. So let's look at the last piece that we have in this puzzle, which is renegotiating. There will be times in this process where you have an opportunity to open pricing back up and talk about what you want to go do with it. So this is an approach which we've used at a number of customers where we just take a look here at our, say, customer A, where we have a start, target, and floor prices. And for this customer, their health, and we'll talk a little about what health means in just a bit, is quite high. And we feel that we can make movements and perhaps significant movements in their price towards the target. We may have another customer, customer B, where the health of that customer, the pricing health is low. And we feel that either we may not want to move them at all, or we want to develop customer-specific, or this is really customer product-specific guidance about how to move their price from what they were previously paying to what they should be paying. And this is not modification of the pricing record, but instead this is guidance provided to sales reps or the national account team or whomever is really managing this process to go about resetting where the price is. So just another couple of examples here where we may have our customer C. They're in a medium spot. They're already, though, within our deal envelope. And so what we're going to do is kind of leave them where they are. Or we might have one that is in the deal envelope, but we feel like there are real problems that have developed there over time. We may have noticed a significant decrease in the quantity that they're purchasing, or a lot of sensitivity beginning to develop, where we may actually want to move their price within the envelope, but down from where they are today. Or it could be that we have one that's above the start, and we just want to leave it where it is because the relationship is good and healthy, and they've continued to purchase at those prices. So when we think about those three areas, there are opportunities associated with each one, and we can't just say these are fixed prices and we can't touch them. Let's talk just a bit for contracts because we're getting close to time. The thing about contracts are, those are much more formal. So when we go back to our customer contracts here on our right-hand side, negotiated by our account team, what we find is there's plenty of opportunity within the initial price setting and renegotiation, but oftentimes not as much in that mid-period management. So what we really want to focus on in that initial price setting is having a great set of analytics that is going to look at a consistent set of KPIs, prior purchase history. And one of the great things that we have with agreements is, and these long-term customer contracts, is we can see whether or not they've honored the agreement terms that we initially set or the volume taking expectations and incorporate that into our future pricing decisions, as well as incorporate some of that price guidance that we just looked at that is customer and product specific. And then, of course, we may want to move that through a formalized approval process where we have given KPIs that will trigger that, whether to auto approve it or to go through a good audit process and have that reviewed, analyzed, and verified by our management team. Finally on it, what we find is on these, it's very organizational specific. Oftentimes it is account specific. So understanding what our opportunities there, we just have to determine through a set of conversations what we can do. A couple of things from today are, one, we want to try to decrease our margin leakage by using good guidance. And we want to align this with our market strategy to tighten up distributions. And then finally, we do need to have a healthy process to review our customer exceptions, which are reviewable, and then try to shift our percentage of sales that goes through our other centralized mechanisms as much as we can. And that oftentimes involves keeping those other mechanisms healthy and up to date to make sure that we're not overrun by highly decentralized, highly dispersed pricing out there. So I wish you all luck in your initiatives out there. I know Megan will be sending out this presentation as well as the video cast. Obviously, would be thrilled to have further discussions with you all about how we can help with your pricing initiatives. Also, we will be at PPS in Berlin at both of the vendor hall, and you can see yours truly speaking about addressing each of the price modes and what can be done there. So thank you all for your time today, and I think there are a couple of questions there.
Thank you, Brooks. There are a couple of questions. You did an outstanding job. I'm going to try to leave that presentation contact information out at the base, but when we jump into Q&A, I'm going to put I'm going to put Mr. Hamilton's face, I don't know why I want to say Bruce, Brooks's face up at the center so that everyone can view his reply. Looks like we've got about 2 questions that are coming in at the base. There's still time to hop in and answer questions. Brooks has about 5 to 10 minutes to knock out some questions. And then if you think of anything thereafter the time has lapsed for Brooks to answer live, you can always reach out to him as his contact information is the last slide. Just a reminder, as part of our closing notes, that all of our attendees will in fact receive a copy of today's presentation deck. It looks like everyone loved your presentation, Brooks. Within 2 business days, so give it 2 full business days, and then you will receive in your inboxes the replay link, which is universal, and the slide deck, which has our continued contact information as well. And as I mentioned before at the start of today's webinar, we encourage you all to visit our website, pricingsociety.com, to subscribe to our email listings so that you can stay abreast of all of our fabulous content shares on our website, on our blog. Subscribe to our podcast. We have webinars several times throughout the month. You can follow our Crowdcast channel. We try to make it as easy as possible for our growing pricing community, and we provide exclusive opportunities for our members. So we would love to talk to you all more about that at any given time. We're on all social platforms as well. Just as Brooks mentioned, we will be in Berlin in 2.5 weeks. So if you are in the European vicinity and you're in Germany and still interested in stopping by our European and global pricing workshops and conference event, we're very excited about it. You still have time to register, and you still actually have time to get into our host hotel. It's going to be an exciting 4 days of intensive workshops. It culminates with a keynote session, and you can interact with some of our leading sponsors overseas as well. And as Brooks mentioned, Zilliant will be there. I believe that's all for my closing notes. Brooks will be there as well. You're also going to receive a short 3-question survey in your email as well. So please be sure to fill that out. We love your feedback so that we can continue to provide you all the best in pricing, value, and content. Everyone continue to share the great praises. Brooks, they loved it. Brooks, are you ready for your Q&A?
Yes.
Okay, everyone, again, visit pricingsociety.com. We're going to answer these 2 questions very quickly, and then we're going to get ready for our next webinar on another time. So Brooks, I'm going to close this screen down. I'm going to bring you to the front, and then I am going to get to it. So first question, Mr. Hamilton, how do you think about this in terms of a market basket versus a single product, i.e. customer purchases 100 items? I'm assuming that's the example. Do you evaluate item specific, or is there a consideration for the whole item set?
Yeah, that's a great question. First off, like to go back to a slide. I'm not sure if it's possible or not, but I'll talk through it. If you all recall the slide where we looked at kind of submitting for approval and going through a formal approval process, there are two portions to it. There are the analytics as well as the price envelopes. When we're considering a request for price discounts for a given customer, and they may have requested price discounts for a product or tens, hundreds, thousands of products, we find it critical to consider the full basket of products within that request. So one, we would like to see an evaluation of how each of those products compares to various financial metrics, such as what are our quantity expectations and what is our margins, as well as at the product level. How does that compare to our price guidance that is offered either for initial segment pricing or for customer-specific pricing? But all of that should really be combined at the approval request level. So that way we have an idea of what is the overall margin for this going to be, and what is the overall sales amount, and how does this overall request look in terms of target attainment. So is the entire thing below floor? Is all of it at target? Even though there might be some products which are very low and others that are higher that allow for that to balance out. But we absolutely think that it needs to be considered together. For the second question was, how do antitrust laws...
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's how do antitrust laws affect controls on pricing? It's not clear that the low prices are supported by a meet the competition exception, right? So this is something that certainly varies from industry to industry in terms of how the antitrust laws are applied. Because it's different by industry, I would really recommend following up with proper legal counsel on that. Things that we find that are very helpful for public companies is to have a clearly defined rationale of how your prices are set so that they are not just kind of set from individual to individual without rationale, but instead one that can be reflected within a policy document where you explicitly define the product, customer, order, and geographic considerations that are taking into your price setting and can be then shown and described to any audit team that's out there. So that's something that I think we find that really helps think through those considerations when working with the legal team.
Thank you, Brooks. And our last question is, can you talk about how to set the list price?
I would be happy to talk about how to set a list price, but that might be another half hour there. I would say go ahead and reach out. We have a great presentation that was at PPS on that, and we'd be happy to follow up there.
Thank you so much, Brooks. You did an outstanding job. The compliments are flowing into the right-hand side. And again, everyone, Mr. Hamilton's contact information is going to be listed at the last slide within the presentation. That'll be sent out 2 business days, 2. So no need to panic if it's not in your inbox immediately or tomorrow. Try Friday, or maybe try Monday, 2 business days. And you'll have all that contact information. Worst case, contact us at the Professional Pricing Society, and we'll be happy to help you. Thank you again, Brooks. Thank you to our team at Zilliant. You all were awesome and a joy to work with. Till next time, we'll see you all here at Crowdcast for the next pricing webinar or in Berlin. See you in Europe. And you all have a fabulous day. Happy pricing. Thank you, Brooks. Thank you, Zilliant.
Thank you, Megan. Bye-bye.